Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we got a couple of things to discuss, including a waiver update, a couple of injury updates, a retirement, a suspension, and a couple of trade rumors involving teams like the Vancouver Canucks, the Calgary Flames, and the LA Kings. And we'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the NHL Hockey Channel. So before I begin this video, don't forget to like this video, and if you really like to, remember to subscribe down below. We are so close to 100 subscribers, so thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so don't forget to subscribe. I know, as usual, I'm going to kick things off today by discussing a waiver placement that happened a little while ago. There was no signings, no PTO updates over the past couple of days, so nothing really to talk about right there, but we did have on Thursday morning, we did have a waiver placement, and that was Jordan Oesterle, who was a good solid 6th-7th defenseman with the Calgary Flames. He was placed on waivers. I thought there would have been a couple of teams who might have interest in him. He's on a very cheap, under $1 million deal. He's on a 1-year deal. He has a lot of NHL experience. He's a good 6th, 7th defenseman who's bounced around the NHL over the past couple of years. I thought there could have been a couple of teams who could use him as like a solid depth defenseman, but that wound up not being the case, as Oesterle wound up clearing waivers and he's been sent down to a minor. So not overly surprised that he didn't get claimed, but I did think there would be a couple of teams, especially teams who have some injuries right now on the blue line, like maybe New York Rangers or maybe an Ottawa Senators, who definitely had some injuries, who I think could have taken a flyer on him. At the very least, it could have then put him on waivers when some of those other guys got back. So I am a little bit surprised that he did wind up getting cleared, but I'm not overly shocked. He is more of a 6th, 7th defenseman, so I can see why some teams would want to pass on him. So Oesterle winds up clearing waivers. He's been sent down. The Flames are trying different combinations right now. I mean, they called up Zari a couple days ago. They sent down Matthew Coronado. It sounds like they're calling up Martin Pospisil. They're calling up Nick DeSimone. So Flames are trying different combinations right now to sort of rejuvenate that offense and try and get that team back into the contention, as they're not looking overly well right now, 2-7-1. So they're trying lots of different things to try and get themselves back in the playoff race, but at this point in time, it does not look overly good for them to get back in the playoff race. So that's not overly good, but Oesterle clears waivers. He's been sent down, so they're going to have a little more cap flexibility and be able to call up some other players now. So going to be interesting to see, but that's the only waiver update we have for today. We have a couple of injury updates here from around the NHL. First, Dylan Dubé has an undisclosed injury. He's currently day-to-day right now for the Calgary Flames. Radek Faksa has an upper body injury. He's day-to-day right now for the Dallas Stars. Then all of these guys, Matthew Boldy, Scott Mayfield, Evan Rodriguez, and Vasily Ponomarev were cleared to play. Rodriguez got back for the Florida Panthers, Mayfield got back for the New York Islanders, Boldy got back for the Minnesota Wild, and Ponomarev was sent down after starting the season on season opening injury reserve. And Fox has a lower body injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Philip Peter has an upper body injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. It sounds like Fox is being placed on long-term injury reserve, so he's going to miss at least the next 4 weeks. So that's a huge blow to the New York Rangers. Heedle, not exactly sure his timeline, but hopefully it's not out overly long. The Ottawa Senators lost Ridley Greig and Mark Kostelich. Kostelich, ankle injury, out for an unknown period of time. Greig, lower body injury, out for an unknown period of time. Kostelich is their solid 4th-line center. Greig was their 3rd-line center. Really bad blows there for the Senators, especially given the fact Pinto's still currently suspended right now. So that's really, really bad blows for the Ottawa Senators. Hopefully those two guys can get back in the not-too-distant future, and they're not going to be able for an overly long period of time, but it doesn't look overly good right now for the Ottawa Senators. The Montreal Canadiens lost Raphael Harvey-Pinard. He's out with a lower body injury, out for an unknown period of time right now for the Montreal Canadiens, so that's a big blow for the Montreal Canadiens. Really bad for them. Timothy Liljegren has an ankle injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time, and the Leafs continue to say it's going to be more longer term, so that's an awful injury blow for the Leafs, given the fact they're already down Jake McCabe. So that's awful news for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Then you have Connor Brown, who has an undisclosed injury. It sounds like he's day-to-day right now, so he's going to miss the next few games. So really bad blow for the Oilers. Derek Forbort has an undisclosed injury. He's currently out day-to-day for the Boston Bruins, so that's not an overly good injury for the Bruins. Hopefully he can get back in the not-too-distant future. Adam Pelech has an undisclosed injury. He's out day-to-day for the Islanders, so hopefully he can get back in the game action in the not-too-distant future. Sean Couturier with a lower body injury and Carter Hart with an undisclosed injury are both day-to-day right now. They missed yesterday's game against the Philadelphia Flyers, so those are bad injury updates there for those two teams. Igor Shesterkin's been added to the list of injured Rangers right now. Undisclosed injury out day-to-day, so Rangers have a really bad blow on the injury front. Detroit Red Wings have Christian Fischer out day now with upper body injury. Not overly great news for the Red Wings, but they have the depth to overcome that, so they're in a little bit better position than some of these other teams, but still, really bad blow to lose a bottom six forward like him. Jack Hughes went awkwardly into the boards in yesterday's game between the Devils and the St. Louis Blues. Was slow to get up, never returned to the game. He currently has an upper body injury out for an unknown period of time, and it sounds like over the next couple of days we'll learn how significant the injury is, so really bad blow for the New Jersey Devils. Christian Dvorak has been cleared to play after missing the first month due to injuries, so he could get back in the next couple of games for the Montreal Canadiens, and that will be interesting to see. But those are your injury updates there, so like we said, good to see some of these guys clear and get back in the game action. But for a couple of these guys like an McAvoy Fox and maybe a Shesterkin and Heel on New York Rangers, Ottawa with Kostelec and Greig, Leafs with Liljegren, as looks like it's possibly a little bit longer term. Some of these other guys, really bad injury blows. Hopefully Shesterkin and Heel can get back in the notches in the future, but it sounds like Fox is going to miss a while. Hopefully Kostelec and Greig can get back in the next little while, but it sounds like they could miss a significant period of time. Liljegren, hopefully he can get back in the not too distant future, but it sounds like he's going to miss a significant period of time. So definitely, we got a couple of guys back off of injuries. We also have a couple of guys out day right now. But for those players, it really just hurt that team. So some really bad injury updates there for teams like the Rangers, the Senators, and the Leafs. And hopefully they can get back and they're not out for an overly long period of time. Going over to a couple of pieces of news, just quick updates here. Charlie McAvoy, I forgot to mention this in my last video, was suspended 4 games for a hit to the head on Florida Panthers defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So he's going to be suspended for the next 4 games. I think he's already served 1, maybe 2 games on his suspension. So he's definitely going to miss a little bit of time due to his suspension. I think it was definitely a worthy suspension of around 4 games. I thought maybe 2 or 3. I wasn't expecting 4. But this is a really close and similar hit to the one that Rasmus Andersson hits on Columbus Blue Jackets forward Patrick Laine a couple weeks ago that cost him 4 games. So I'm not overly shocked it was 4 games, but I did think it might maybe 2 or 3. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I think the 4-game suspension was justified for McAvoy, and he's going to be out for the next little while. On top of that, we had another retirement. We had a lot of retirements this offseason, and it continues. According to TSN Insider Trading, Paul Stastny has retired from the NHL. He's had a long career in the NHL, over 1,100 games, playing 1,145 games, had 293 goals, 529 assists for 822 points. He's looked fantastic throughout his career. His best seasons came in Colorado. Then he started to trail off, but he still was a very productive player towards the later part of his career. His first 8 seasons came in Colorado. He left Colorado in 13-14. Then he would play the next 4 seasons in St. Louis. He was a really good player in St. Louis. He was traded at the trade deadline to the Winnipeg Jets in 17-18. Finishes up the season with the Jets, then signs a member with the Vegas Golden Knights the year after. Was a really good player for the Vegas Golden Knights those 2 years he was there. Then the Knights traded him back to Winnipeg. He played in Winnipeg for 2 years. He was a really good player for the Jets. And then he spent last year with the Carolina Hurricanes, putting up 9 goals, 22 points, and 73 games, and helping the Carolina Hurricanes reach the Eastern Conference Finals. So definitely, he's had a long career, very successful player. Definitely, I don't think he won any Stanley Cups, but he was a very successful player who definitely did really good, following in his dad's footsteps. And he's had a really long, extremely good career. So it's been a really good career for Stastny. It sounded like he wasn't going to cramp on PTO. He wanted to get an NHL contract. No one gave it to him, so he decided to retire. So interesting stuff there, but Stastny is now gone from the NHL, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens next for Stastny. No other real big pieces of news other than Stastny retiring. No updates on the Ottawa Senators stuff. It sounds like the GM spot they're going to wait for now. It sounds like they're going to try and take their time. It sounds like Staios may still be the GM eventually, but it sounds like Andlauer might want a 2-headed monster, so he might want Staios to stay as the president of hockey ops, and he may want a new GM to sort of work with Staios. There's been a lot of people who have been discussing this and sort of trying to figure out fits. Like I said in my last video, some people that Elliot Friedman mentioned were guys like Jason Spezza, possibly Matthew Darsh. Peter Chiarelli's been a name who's been linked there. Some other people think there might be player agents because Andlauer was a part of the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens' new GM is Kent Hughes, who used to be a player agent. So some people think maybe Andlauer will want to sign a player agent to be their new GM as well. So it's possible, but I'm not exactly sure. Still some other names, like we said, Chiarelli, Darsh, Spezza to watch out for. So it's going to be interesting to see, but definitely it sounds like there's going to be a lot of possible options there for Ottawa, and it sounds like Ottawa's going to take their time, not going to rush into this. They want to have players to know they have their backs. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it doesn't sound like a decision is going to be made anytime soon. We may have to wait a couple of months for the decision to be made, but it does sound like at some point, eventually, the Ottawa Senators will wind up naming a GM. It's just going to take a little while. So that's an update on the Ottawa Senators. Then we go over to a couple of trade rumors here. First with the Columbus Blue Jackets. May the Columbus Blue Jackets trade Kent Johnson? This is a really surprising thing for me, in my opinion. Johnson's a fantastic player, 5th overall a couple of years ago, I think. He's been a fantastic player, had a really great season last year, but to start this year, he's been really, really inconsistent. He's been benched a couple of times, he's been scratched a couple of times. He's not looked overly good this year, so the coach started scratching him, and then Kent Johnson's now been sent down to the minors. So not overly great stuff from Kent Johnson. Now the reason why a lot of people think he could be traded, or they're talking about him possibly being traded, is because he recently changed agents. The new agency that represents him helped guys like Thess Jones and Pierre-Luc Dubois get out of Columbus. A lot of people think now that he switched to that agency, maybe he's trying to get out of Columbus. I don't think it's that scenario yet. Johnson's still a really good young player. I think he'll eventually fit into that top 6, maybe eventually even be like a top-line center with a guy like Laine and Gaudreau, or at the very least be a fantastic second-line player. So I still see Johnson fitting in. I know he hasn't had the best of starts to the season, being scratched a couple of times, now being sent down to the minors. But if he can put up a really good run in the minors, recalled, and show that he can be a fantastic top-9 forward, I think he should be all right. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I don't expect him to get traded. I know there's been a lot of other people who have said that he could be traded, maybe, or at least been talking about it, but personally I don't see the Jackets trading Kent Johnson, and don't see him asking for a trade after a handful of games in his second year in the NHL, not doing overly well. So I don't expect that to happen, but it's just an interesting thing for him to switch agents, when he has no contract extension right now needed. So it'll be interesting to see, but it does sound like some people think it's possible Johnson might wind up wanting to leave Columbus eventually, but I don't think so. I think he'll eventually be a very fantastic, integral piece of that top section Columbus, so I don't expect him to leave. Going over to the Montreal Canadiens, could we see the Canadiens move a goaltender in the not too distant future? According to Darren Dreger on TSN Insider Trading, it sounds like the Canadiens have had really good goaltending to start the season, but it sounds like they may try and maybe move one of them in the not too distant future. Allen's done fantastic for Montreal. His contract's not overly fantastic, but he's shown he can be a really good veteran presence on that team, so to see Allen do really good is fantastic. Sam Montembeault's done alright. He's a pending UFA though, so he wants to know that he can get paid, so he wants to start as many games as he can to sort of bump up his stats for his new contract. On top of that, Cam Primo's gone to a couple of games. He hasn't looked overly great, but he's been played, I think, as most likely the third stringer, so he's not played overly much for the Montreal Canadiens, so it'll be interesting to see. We've heard some talks over the past few weeks, like we said, right before training camp, around training camp, that maybe Cam Primo's traded, maybe Jake Allen's traded. We know that the Canadiens like Montembeault, most likely want to keep him. But Allen, Primo possibly being traded in the not too distant future. We know that there's a couple of teams out there who could use some goalie help. They don't have too much cap space, so maybe Primo's more likely. They know the Canadiens are still wary of placing Primo on waivers. They know he's probably going to get picked up, so it'll be interesting to see what the Canadiens do here. But it sounds like they cannot run for a 3-headed goalie monster forever, and eventually they will have to try and move one of them via waivers, via trade somehow. Allen's done all right to start the season. He's been really, really good, so he's probably bumping up his trade value, but once again, his $3.75 million cap hit is not overly favorable for a lot of teams. Montembeault, like we said, $1 million, pending UFA. He wants to try and get as much games in as he can to sort of bump up his stats, show that he can be a solid, at the very least, tandem goaltender. Primo, like we said, he's the goalie of the future. At one point, does not look overly great right now, but I could definitely still see the Canadiens want to keep him, but they can't place him on waivers for the fear of losing him to a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but the Montreal Canadiens at this point in time may wind up making a goaltending move in the not too distant future, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Quick update here with the Calgary Flames. According to Eric Francis, who said that the Calgary Flames had held talks with all pending UFAs while they're in the losing slump right now, and they're going to try and rediscover what this team is before they start signing big long-term deals for pending UFAs. He says there's a very likely chance that this team goes into not long, but a really significant retool. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. According to some reports, it sounds like Hanifin was the one who decided to cut off contract talks between him and the Flames, not the Flames. It sounded like the Flames were going to sign to a deal that was north of Devon Taves' AAV. So I definitely think that might have been a little bit of an overpayment if they did sign that for Hanifin. I think Hanifin's more around the $6.5, $7.5 million, maybe not above Taves, but somewhere just below him. But definitely, it sounds like Hanifin's not overly comfortable signing a long-term extension if this Flames team doesn't look good. Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Chris Tanev, none of those guys were really close on signing, but it sounds like the Flames didn't want to extend them at this point in time, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. On top of that, like I said in my last video, I think there's a very likely chance that this team goes on a significant retool or possibly a rebuild in the not too distant future, and it could happen as soon as this year. Like I said, at this point in time, if the Flames continue to lose like this, I expect guys like Lindholm, Zadorov, Tanev, and Hanifin to be moved at the deadline for whatever price they can get. And like I said, I would not be shocked if at the deadline or possibly in the offseason, some of these other guys, like possibly Sharon Govich, Mangiapane, a couple of these other guys could possibly wind up finding themselves on the way out. I find it hard to believe that they will be able to trade some of their longer-term deals, like a Huberdeau, like a Kadri, like a Uyghur. Those three are extremely long-term deals, even Coleman to some extent. I think those four are really untradeable assets in my opinion, and according to Elliot Friedman, the Calgary Flames are going to try and do whatever they can to make Huberdeau fit in well in Calgary. He hasn't fit in well up to this point. He's not played like he did in Florida, so it's definitely interesting to see. He's not fitting well in Calgary like he did in Florida, so if he can start producing like he did in Florida when he was like an 80, 90, 100 point player, I think the Flames will be a lot happier with that Huberdeau contract. So it sounds like they're going to try and do whatever they can to give him a good fit in the team system. So that's going to be interesting to see for Huberdeau. The Flames really want to try and make the Huberdeau fit work. So I'm not exactly sure if they've even been considered for a trade. But Huberdeau and Uyghur have this year plus 7 years left. Kadri has this year plus 5 years left. On top of that, Coleman has this year and I think a couple more seasons left. So I think those four are probably the most unlikely trade targets for the Calgary Flames. But besides that, I think there's a very likely chance most of these other guys could wind up being dealt by the Calgary Flames. So it'll be interesting to see. And lastly here, could the Vancouver Canucks still add a defenseman? It sounds like the Canucks have been really, really happy with their start to the season. That management is possibly willing to reward their team's hard work by upgrading their team. And it sounds like they're still looking to try and add a defenseman. We know that they could definitely use a right shot defensive upgrade, possibly on like the second pair. The first pair on this team has been absolutely dynamic this year with Hughes and Ronick, but they could definitely use a little bit of help in their other pairs on their second and third pair. Myers, Seuss, they're decent defensemen, but ideally they're not second pair defensemen, they're more third pair defensemen. So Canucks could use some of their forward group, like we talked about before, Garland, maybe Bouvillier, to try and add on the blue line. So I think that's still a very likely possibility, whether it's Garland, whether it's Bouvillier. One of those guys possibly gets moved, and they bring in a new defenseman. I'm still looking at like Andrew Peeke or Bolkvist in Columbus. They're both decent defensemen who I think could work really well. You also have a guy like Chris Tanev in Calgary. I could see him be a good fit. Maybe a couple of other guys who are pending UFAs at the deadline. Like I said, Nashville with maybe a Fabro or a Carrier. Maybe a guy like Matt Dumba from Arizona could be a fit there too. I think there's definitely a couple of options there for the Vancouver Canucks to try and add a right shot defenseman using one of their forwards. So it's still going to be really tricky. Like we said, Bouvillier has over $4 million cap hit. Garland's cap is just under 5. So it'll be a very difficult trade to pull off with all these teams not having too much cap space. But I do think there's a very likely chance that maybe not even in the near future, but at least some point before the deadline, if the Canucks continue this pace and they continue to be a very good team, the Canucks possibly wind up making a trade to improve their blue line and reward their team for such a fantastic start. So it'll be interesting to see, but it sounds like the Canucks are still interested in a defenseman. It sounds like they could still be looking for some options to try and improve this team, and it sounds like on the blue line, the Canucks could try to add a defenseman. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all that was discussed today down in the comments. Does Kent Johnson get moved at some point? I personally don't see it, but I do think it was really weird of him switching agents at this point in time. So especially going to an agency that helped Seth Jones and Pierre-Luc Dubois leave Columbus. So it'll It'll be interesting to see, but personally, I don't see Kent Johnson being moved. Are you surprised that the Calgary Flames stopped all contract negotiations, and do you see them possibly moving everyone? I think there's a very likely chance that Lindholm, Hanifin, Tanev, and Zadorov are all gone by the trade deadline. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think that's a very likely option, with guys like Mangiapane and Sharon Govich possibly moving like the off-season. So that's going to be interesting to see. Also, on top of that, do you see the Montreal Canadiens moving a goalie? If so, is it Montembeault? Is it Allen? Is it Primo? Definitely love to hear who you think is going to be moved down in the comments. Do you see the Canucks adding the defenseman before a trade deadline to reward their team with such good play? I think they've had a really good start to this season, and I think they definitely deserve an upgrade of some sorts. So I definitely do like the fact that they could possibly upgrade their defense. I think a top 4 right shot defenseman would be fantastic for them, but definitely love to hear what you guys think down in the comments. And if they are going to upgrade, what sort of a defenseman do you think winds up going to Vancouver? And what do you think about the other things we talked about? What do you think about Ottawa's GM shirts? What do you think about the McAvoy suspension? And what do you think about Stastny calling it quits? Definitely love to hear guys' thoughts down in the comments. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're really to remember to subscribe down below. We are so close to 200 subscribers. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so don't forget to subscribe down below. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I'll leave a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.